Let's get started. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is one of the more challenging presentations I'm doing. Don't know how well it's going to work, trying to cover a lot. This is something that I've been thinking about for a long time. I've tried to communicate it, tried to think about it. It's a difficult thing. And let's see what we can do today. So this presentation builds on the presentation that we did earlier. So if you're watching this YouTube video, go ahead and in the comments just below, there is another video. You watch that as a background for that. I'll explain the reason in a minute. This presentation, I've divided it into two parts. The first part, I'm calling From 10 Fields to 4 Strands. The title of the presentation is Fourfold Path. This brings together a lot of work we have done in these 52 Living Ideas meetups in various fields. The first order of business is to talk about moving from 10 fields to 4 strands. I'm expecting that to be about an hour or so. It may be shorter if we can go through it, but I want to make sure everybody gets that point. And then we start building on the 4 strands. That's the proper part of the presentation. And there are 4 different aspects of how these 4 strands come together for forming the fourfold path. So that's going to be the second part. Okay, so that's the plan. So let me get started. So this is the part 1, from 10 fields to 4 strands. Now, I've been talking about 4 functions for some time. This original idea, I was inspired by Carl Jung's cognitive functions. And I worked with it for a long time. I did lots of experiments in New York with like around 80 people showing up with different cognitive functions and looking at their interactions, and had some observations from that. So that was the starting point. And I have generalized from that as a starting point. But then what ended up happening was that I kept on finding different fields and I saw similar patterns in them. And then I saw the limitations of Carl Jung's approach, which is heavily psychological. So there are 2 of these functions that he does a fantastic job on. And 2 of the functions he's relatively weak on. There are people who are much better than him. So I've tried to put it all together in my own way. So let's get started. The graphic I'm using here of the 4-stranded rope is the best graphic visual presentation of what I'm thinking about. I'm saying that there are 4 different things that we do as human beings, and they have to come together in some way. They have to not just come together at a given point of time. Each of them is like a thread. Each of them is like a strand, has its own life pattern to it. And it interacts with these other strands, some within yourself, some outside of yourself with other people. So how does that all shebang work? That's what this presentation is about. But we're going to go step by step. First, we're going to look at 10 fields and try to identify these 4 strands in it. So this is the graphic that I'm going to keep coming back to. These are the 4 strands. So you remember the individuality of each of the strands. Some of these strands you will know better than other strands. And then, but you have to realize and respect that you need the other strands too, either inside yourself or with other people, or it is there, somebody else is providing that. And you have to be respectful of that. So that's the basic idea. So this graphic, we're going to keep coming to again and again and again so that we never forget that. Okay, so let's start. This is the same slide that I'd used in the last presentation. So again, folks, if you're watching this on YouTube and if you've not seen this presentation, please go to the video below where we discuss each of these 8 fields in detail. What I'm going to do now is that I'm going to give you a 5-minute or 10-minute quick overview of all these 4 fields. But I'm assuming that you know all of these. Now, the important thing is that you don't need to know each of these fields, but you do need to know at least one field really well, hopefully 2 or 3 fields fairly well, so you can abstract out this idea of 4 strands. I'm using color, it's all color coded. The 4 strands are the yellow, the blue, the green, and the red. Okay, so I'm going to quickly run through these 8 fields. If you have already watched, if you participated in the meetup or if you watched the video, this is a critical recap that you need so that you can now think about the same issues at a higher level. I've deliberately put 4 things in the 4 corners: the Sullivan, the communication, McLuhan, and Boyd, because each of them excels at one of these functions really well. So for example, Sullivan is superb at intuition. So let me put forth how Sullivan thinks of these 4 functions. His autobiography, right in the beginning, he says, life began to break in upon him. And a continuous breaking in from outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. So breaking in is the function of taking things in, seeing things that are at the edge of your consciousness, being aware of those things, intuiting, trying to look for patterns. His famous dictum is form follows function. Function is your inductive process of identifying what pattern you're seeing and trying to capture it in the crispest terms possible. So that's coming up with a function. Then you implement the function in life using forms. So this part is internal. These 2 are external. The one below, the yellow and red, are automatic processes. These are system 1. The blue and green are conscious processes. So form follows function. You implement, plan what you need to do, and then you break out in the sense that you impact the world with what you have in forms. And then you break in again. That means you keep saying, what is the impact? What do I need to do next? So it's a cycle. It's a continuous cycling between these things. Let's jump to communication. Now on this is the part which excels at concepts. If I have to name a person whom currently I think I'm learning most from, and that's Thomas Aquinas, what he's able to do at this level is truly magnificent. What is this? I'm going to start with 1 here. You have a concept of what, I'm going to do this together here, of what you're trying to say. Then you decide how you're going to say it, your plan for saying it. Then you express it. It depends on your audience. You express it. And then you take a feedback from the audience. Why is it that the audience was interested in it, not interested in it? What can you learn from that in order to decide what you're going to talk about next? So it's a loop of communication. At a physical level, in actual action, the person who is the most superb at this is John Boyd, the father of the OODA loop. So OODA loop goes, you observe what is going on, you orient, you observe. Observe is not just passive observing around you. It is, you're really observing for things that you did not expect, things that were surprising, things that contradict what you were expecting. Then you orient. Orient is basically put together all your observations and say, this is what is going on. Then you decide or plan out what you need to do, and then you do it. Now, I want to note here that these things usually happen in a military context. There are 4 different groups of people doing these 4 different kinds of things. The observing is being done by spies and scouts. The automatic intel that they have, that's what is doing the observing. The orienting is done by intelligence people who are trying to piece together all that information. Seeing how you're going to deploy your troops is being done by generals who are planning out what needs to be done. And the action is done by soldiers. So you can begin to see here is that not all these 4 things necessarily happen in the same person. It can be distributed across people. Okay. The most interesting example for me is McLuhan. McLuhan is superb at the how part of how different technologies or different human artifacts impact people. I talked about the example of a chair, where chair tries to retrieve, the core idea of the chair is to make you comfortable. So it's trying to retrieve comfort. How it does it is by enhancing something. So what does it enhance? It replaces our seat with the seat of the chair, the legs with legs, our back with the back of the chair, arms with arms. So that's how it does it. That's the how it enhances. What does it displace? It displaces normal functioning of the muscles. What happens as a result of it? What actually, if you sit like that for 40 years, 10 hours a day, you are going to lose the use of your muscles quite a bit, and you're going to be very uncomfortable, exactly the opposite result of what you were hoping for. So that's an example of how McLuhan uses that. So this is a quick, I want to quickly touch upon a couple more things here. In Aristotle, the formal cause asks the question, what is it? What is it? What is it? The science is all about asking the question, what is it? What is the nature of it? Efficient is about how does it work? This is kind of technologists are obsessed with this. How does it work? Modern world is full of efficient cause. Material cause is how does it actually impact the world? What is the form in which it impacts? How does it change things? And then final cause is why are we doing this? Which is what, not in the modern world, people don't think of this enough. So that is Aristotle over here. It maps onto, we've been looking at the design way. In tradition of philosophy, reality is about metaphysics. It's saying what is. Truth is epistemology of saying how do I actually know it? What do I actually know? The values, the goodness is over here, and design is over here. In design way, he talks about truth, ideal, and real all have to be taken into account while designing something that is beautiful. So that's on philosophy. I cannot resist this. In our meetup on chapter 3 of John, number 16, verse number 16. In a single sentence, it actually captures this entire thing, entire quadrant that I talked about last time, far more compactly in a single sentence. And actually, in Thomas Aquinas' commentary, he talks exactly about these 4 things. God is truth. God loves mankind. How does he impact mankind? Through Jesus, who is half God, half man. It provides, it's the how. And what does it do to mankind? It gives us the inspiration to follow the Holy Spirit back to God. So Aquinas talks about the 4 aspects of that sentence. I don't have it right here, but God so loved the world that he sent his only son, only begotten son. And so that, and Aquinas, in his 4-part analysis, he says it's God who is doing this. He's doing it for mankind. He's sending his son as an example, and he's doing it so that mankind, through Holy Spirit, can come back to God. So that's a quick summary of that. Now, I want to add 2 more. One of them is going back to Carl Jung, and that is all these yellow things over here are about intuition, about trying to pull things together which are at the edge of your consciousness. This is an automatic process. This is a process of forming patterns. Jung is superb at describing intuition in his book on psychological functions. The second part is what he calls feeling, which is actually valuing when you look at it. It is motivated action. And that's the red part. This thinking and sensing, I think people like Boyd, people like Aristotle, people like Aquinas are better at formulating that than Jung. So essentially, the blue part is inductive thinking. That's what the blue part is about. It is about using all the intuitions that you have in order to piece together, to induce. And the green part is about application. So this is intuit, then induce, apply, and then motivated action. So that's how I see Jung mapping into this. But really, the piece that put it all together for me for this presentation was Bhagavad Gita. And this is the advantage of studying many different things and trying to relate them to each other. In Bhagavad Gita, they speak of 4 paths to salvation. 4 paths: Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. And the interesting thing is that all these paths lead you to salvation. They all lead you there. And point I want to add, which is implicit throughout Bhagavad Gita, is that every practitioner of each of these paths respects the practitioners of the other paths. They actually build on each other. The Karma Yoga is guided through Jnana that somebody else has achieved. And if you have a little bit of the other one, you will be able to do the same thing better. So in this scheme, the Karma Yoga is about action. That's the red over here. The Bhakti Yoga is about using your emotions, your intuitions in order to go towards God. So I see that as being the intuitive part. Raja Yoga is all about concentration, of being able to focus on the truth. And that's all about the blue here. And Jnana Yoga is about explicitly figuring out the how of how the world is working. So I'm putting it over here, kind of applied knowledge. I mean, there are different ways in which you can put this, but you can see that their emphasis is different and all of them are leading to the same thing. So that's a very quick overview. Now, what I want to do is I want to jump and start to put this together. Now, the question is, how do I put it together? And I'm going to use a technique that I learned from John Boyd in his paper, Destruction and Creation, in which he says the way you put it together is that you take these things apart. You take all of these different things that you're working on, different systems you're working on, and you take them apart, and then you put them back together. So this is my attempt to do it. But let me again remind you of this. So this is what we are trying to do. We're trying to identify 4 different strands which have independent existence, who have not independent existence, but they have independent character. They have their own nature that go together, and all of them are actually needed in order to have a good life or a good society. Okay, so this is my attempt. It's a little bit overwhelming, but don't be concerned, it will get simplified very soon. Okay, so the question is, how do you take this 10 fields and put them together in 4 strands? So this is the intermediate step that I had. Okay, so now here what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to do it visually. The aim here is to stand at a distance and look at this picture and just focus on the colors. So I've removed the names of where these things have come from. I've put them separately, so if you wish, you can zoom in and see operation of this quadrant, for example. At the same time, you can zoom out and just pay attention to all the red concepts. Or you can pay attention to yellow concepts. You can pay attention to the blue concepts. And at this stage, what you're doing is that you're not looking at, what are the questions? You're not looking at what did Louis Sullivan have to say, or what Carl Jung had to say, or what can I learn from Gita? You're focusing your mind on what is common to the blue. What kind of things are all these blue things pointing to? What I'm saying to you is that you do not need to know each of these 10 things. If you know a few of them, let's say 2 or 3 really well, use those in order to induce for yourself the meaning of what is there in the blue quadrant, from concept, asking what is it, the formal cause, focus on the truth, function, retrieval, God, Raja Yoga, inducing, orienting. What is common to all these things? That is there in the blue. Similarly, for the green, it is planning, focusing on the how, efficient cause, beauty, form, enhance, Jesus, Jnana Yoga, apply, decide. That's there in the green quadrant. Okay. In the red quadrant, number 3 is expression, where the context, current context, material, reality, breaking out, displacing mankind, karma yoga, motivated action, action. And finally, 4th, feedback, why, final causes, goodness, breaking in, flipping, spirit, Bhakti Yoga, intuition, observing. Okay, so this is an intermediate stage. This is just my way of intermediate, as an intermediate step for processing. It's maybe too overwhelming, but I just wanted to give you the intermediate step before we go on, because ultimately what we are trying to do is this. We are trying to identify each of these strands. So now what we have is, for each of these strands, we've got 10 different concepts. Hopefully, maybe 2 to 4 of them speak to you, so you can have your own conception of what yellow we're talking about. Similarly, I'm hoping that you will have the same for each of the 4 strands. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the picture of what the strands look like. So now what we have done is that we've taken this out. I've just kept these very faint lines here. What you want to focus on is these columns here. Okay, so they are now all separated out, and you're trying to just focus on what kind of a thing this is, what kind of a thing this is, what kind of a thing this is, what kind of a thing this is. So these are the 4 strands, and I have already listed out what each of these things are. So this is concept, what, retrieve, orient, function, formal cause, truth, Raja Yoga, and induce in God. And here you got plan, how, enhance, decide, form, efficient cause, beauty, Jnana Yoga, apply, and Jesus. I've tried to keep things that people have found most easy, or at least I have found most easy. So these first five are what my strongest points are. I'm grounding everything in these 5 points. Other ones are only supporting points. Again, I want to emphasize that these are not equal. Like all these 10 words are not equal. What we're trying to do is we're trying to identify a pattern. So these are analogical differences. And we are trying to look for patterns. And you have to formulate the pattern in your own way. So I'm trying to respect your process of grasping this. And I'm giving you the raw material from which you can induce for yourself to see if this idea of 4 different strands captures something fundamental about nature of life. Okay, I think it does, but I want to give you the pieces. You cannot really take words by themselves. You need to be familiar. For example, if you're familiar with the OODA loop, or if you're familiar with, let's say, presentations, or you're familiar with McLuhan, or you're familiar with Sullivan, you'd be able to do that. I just want to say as a background is that we have done a lot of work on this in our meetups. We probably have 30 plus meetups of 2 hours each on Sullivan. We've got about 10 hours on OODA loop. We've got maybe about 10 hours on McLuhan. Here we have not done enough. We've done a little bit on Aquinas. We've done some presentations on writing, which deal with this part very well. And so there is a lot of material from which I am drawing, and you can go back and look at these things, whatever speaks to you more. Okay. All right. So let me go to the next one, and very soon I'm going to take a pause to in this first process. We are almost at the end of the first presentation, and I'm going to open it up for questions very soon. But I think I have 1 or 2 more slides. Again, reminding that this is what we are doing. This is the final one. So this is what we are trying to do. Final one for the part 1. So imagine all these as these. Okay. Now, this is very important. Suppose you're very good at intuition. Suppose you're very good at expression. It's not just a static faculty that you have. It is progressing over time. You're growing with it. It's not static. It's very important to understand that. Secondly, your expression, let's say that you're very strong on expression. Your expression depends on the plan of how you're saying things and what you're trying to say. You have to be aware of the feedback. So they do depend, just like this rope, on the other strands. Okay. There are 4 different relationships like that we are going to talk about in the next part, where we are going to go to this braiding of the 4 strands. But what I want to do now is I want to go back to this one right here. I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to now take questions or comments about so far. So all I have done here is that I have taken these 10 fields. I've shown you what are the 4 parts of it using essentially my past presentation. And now I'm separating each of those strands out, and I'm saying there is a concept behind each of these. And those 4 strands is what I want to talk about next. But I want to take any questions that you have or any comments that you have so far. Especially I want to know, is everything clear so far? What questions you have. I don't want to go into details of things too much, but feel free to ask any question that you have. Laura, what's your question? You need to unmute and try to keep it brief. Okay, I'm trying to cover a very large amount of area, so try to keep it brief. Go ahead.
This is going to be so brief, you're not going to believe it. This is a silly question, actually. I was looking at all the braids, and one color that appears in every braid is red.
It is there for all four colors appear in the braid. All 4 colors appear in the braid. I tried to find the best graphic that I could, but all four have to appear. That's the point. Okay. Anybody else? So firstly, is it clear? Let me know if everything is clear. Is it okay to go on? Now, Joe, go ahead.
I think it's very clear. And that was an excellent presentation. The only one that I'm kind of struggling with a little bit is the communication and the Bible, linking those two, but that's it. Otherwise, it's very clear.
I appreciate that. So my recommendation is that whatever you're struggling with, throw it away.
Okay.
Okay, throw it away, because the inductive process, you have these multiple things. So I've given you 8 other things. So you use the other things that you know in order to abstract, in order to use, as a foundation for understanding what we are going to be talking about, which is going to be interaction between these 4 things and what are the various principles of interaction. Okay, but I will come to that. Can you keep track of it? Maybe at the end of it, we can come to that. Next up is going to be Evanik, followed by Daljit. Evanik.
Yeah, I think it's clear. And I think you kind of actually answered my question, because my question was about interaction, but I do have one.
Sure.
Is there, and maybe this is coming up, but is there ever a time where one strand is like more dominant than the other?
Absolutely. I have a whole slide on it, and we are going to be spending quite a bit of time on that. So you have anticipated correctly.
Okay.
Wonderful. Daljit.
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. One of the things that jumped out at me when you put the columns together was you have, and maybe it's my lack of understanding of these mnemonics, but the Sullivan form is green, the Aristotle formal is blue. And in my mind, I equate those two, and I was like, my mind wanted to put them in the same category. And I wonder why.
No, unfortunately, the word form, many words throughout history have been used to refer to something completely different. So what Sullivan means by function is very close to what Aristotle means by form of a thing. Because when he's talking about form of a thing, he's talking about nature of things. What is the nature of things? And the same question when Sullivan asks, he asks, what is the function of it? So function for Sullivan is form. So it's the same word, but used in a very different context. Next up is Ellen.
Are there any patterns? I've done work like this in some other areas, and it seems to me that you could split the 4 quadrants into 2 halves, being and becoming.
Let me go ahead and show you the various ways. I don't want to get too far into other things, because as it is a complex presentation. So the essential thing, that if you want to break it in 2 ways, there are actually 2 different ways. So one part is conscious. So the blue and green are conscious, deliberate. It is system 2. And the yellow and red are unconscious, automatic. That's system 1. So that's 1. Second is the difference between in and out. So the left side, the yellow and blue are in, and the green and red are out. So what you have is that you've got unconscious in This is conscious in, this is conscious out, and then unconscious out. That's how you have it. But that's a great question about being and becoming. Please ask it at the end of the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Okay. So if it's okay with you folks, let me go ahead to the next part. Part 2. We're doing okay on time. Actually good on time, because I'm really glad, because the meat of what I have to say is in the second part. All right, so let me get started. Okay, so this is braiding of 4 strands. And today I want to make 4 points about it. So first point is about respect and the idea of e pluribus unum, from the many one. Okay, I think that's a crucial idea here. Second, following up on Evanik's point, is about strengths and weaknesses that each of us have, tensions between these various strands. There are tensions between them. They're not as if they were just like the rope there, that there is an actual tension between them. It's, imagine that they are like electric. So one is positive, one is negative. So there is like tension between them. And then I want to talk about cooperation. So how does this work between people? I'm expecting that the bulk of the material, interesting material, is in point 2. I want to emphasize about the spiral growth of the whole and parts, that you have to look at it not in a static manner, but in a dynamic manner, that this is continuously growing. And actually, it's not a rope, it's a spiral, where the thickness of each of the strand varies over time, grows over time. Okay, so that is a better capture, that is more fuller capturing. But this time I thought that just a rope was enough to actually make the basic point. I'm hoping to develop a better graphic for that. And I think spiral captures it, interweaving spirals of differing thickness and changing thickness over time is what it actually looks like. And the last one is about hierarchy. There is, they are not all equal. They have very different functions, and each has its own nature. And we tend to look at other strands through the perspective that we are used to. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about it. So that's just the overview of what I'm going to do. So first one, and I'm probably going to go very quickly over that, all these 4, and then come back to the slide to talk about it at length, take questions. So now it's going to be, so I want to do a quick overview so you have full idea of what I'm going to cover, what I want to cover. I will say enough in each of them so that the basic points are made, but then I'm going to come back on these slides and answer as many questions as you have. So here, the simple point I'm making is that you need all these 4. In reality, you need all these 4. No matter, let's take the example that I started with of Boyd, orient, decide, act, and observe. A soldier who is tremendously capable of acting depends on somebody who is doing the plans. If the plans are screwed up, there are going to be problems. He depends on somebody putting together all the information that is there, changing information. He depends on the scouts. Similarly, the scouts depend on the rest. Similarly, the person who is doing planning depends on the rest. So there is a dependence that you have. Even if you're doing just one of these things, you're dependent on all the 4. And I like the word respect. I mean, first, originally I used to think that, okay, I have to try to get strong at all of these things. And many times that's not possible. Many times there are people who are going to be better, and it's much better to work with them. But one of the things, so the basic starting point is, I think, respect, saying, don't disparage things just because they are just not like you. It requires, the world requires these four things. So respect not only your own strengths, but the strengths of others. And try to work with them in this e pluribus unum fashion, one out of many. Formation of America is a very good example of that, where it lets individuals proceed, pursue their own happiness, protect their all freedoms, and do that in a systematic way, so that everybody, so that principle of you have to bring this together. So it's a very basic point, okay? What I'm going to do is that I'm going to actually, let's see, I'm going to go to the spiral point next. Let me just go to the spiral point. Okay, again, I'm going to this, jumping to this because it's a simpler point. Always remember that none of this is static. Your strengths, you can look back at yourself and you can see that your strengths have grown. Some of your weaknesses are still weak. Sometimes they have gotten weaker. Sometimes you have improved them. So you have to look at it in a dynamic way. So this dynamism, the growth mindset, is crucial to thinking about this. That's a very simple point, but it's a very important point. So it's not static, but dynamic. Let me make the third point also, which is very relatively simple point. And then we will come to the strengths, weaknesses, and cooperation, tensions in cooperation, which is like the heart of the complexity here. Okay, so the point I want to make is that the nature of each of these things is different. The objects of each of these four things are different. The form in which they operate is different. And if you're used to doing something at one of the levels, you automatically try to do the other things at the same level. And that doesn't work. You need to understand the unique capabilities of each of these things. So for example, this point, the blue, is the most concentrated. It's the most concentrated, super concentrated, like Raja Yoga, which is all about concentrating your attention, or a concept, asking the question, what is it? Or saying, what is the seed of it? What's the function of it? What is the root of this? This is highly compact. Whereas at the other extreme, if you take the yellow, the feedback, the openness, the trying to grapple with the chaos, to be aware, to have your intuitions out there, that is very diffuse, and you're trying to take in from all sources. You're trying to be open to everything. Similarly, so that's the most extreme differences here. Then here you've got the green, which is planning, which is more expanded of the how, from the what, more expanded. So it is more expanded than this, but planning is far more compact than the actual execution. There is a lot more that comes in to the execution. So there is a hierarchy of how much is there in each of them and how they internally work. And there is a lot to be said about the individual natures of each of these, which we can go into at a later time. But all I want to say here is that there is difference of character between these four things. Now, what I want to do is I want to quickly jump and go to this slide where most of the interesting material is. Okay. Again, a lot of what I'm saying here is based on Carl Jung's work, but I'm using the modified concepts that I have. But some of these things he has captured really, really well. First thing you have to realize is that you are not equally strong on all these four. You're going to be very strong on some of these and weak on other things. And knowing your strengths and weaknesses is actually critical. Ray Dalio, in his book Principles, has very interesting things to say about weakness. He says that, let me step back a little bit. So regarding strengths and weaknesses, you have essentially two choices. One is that you can double up on your strengths and build them up. And second is you can improve on the weaknesses. And you have to decide how much you should do of each of them. Ray Dalio has some very fundamental things to say about weakness I have always liked. He says there are four ways of dealing with weakness. One is to evade them, which is what many people do. Okay, and that doesn't actually get you anywhere because they remain your weaknesses, keep on hurting you. Okay. The second one is to work with someone who is strong on where you're weak. And so that's the second one. The third one is you can actually try to improve on your weakness. So wherever you're weak, you try to become maybe 10% better, 20% better. That's going to give you outsized results. And third is that you change what you're doing so that the weaknesses don't hurt you as much. And I think the order is this order. I used to think that first is that I should try to fix my weaknesses. Actually, working with people who are strong where you're weak is the best way to start off, even if your goal is to learn. Because what happens is that if you're weak on something, your ability to tell how good or poor you are is very poor. So it's much better to work with people so you at least know the scale. Okay, like you think that you have become twice as good, but you may be still from like 1% to 2%, and you would never know that. If you're dealing with people who are very, very good at places where you're weak, then you have a scale. That's one. Second, our capability of learning through imitation by interacting with people is amazingly good. So if you just wanted to improve, working with people who are strong where you're weak is a good way to do that. And then you can negotiate with people to choose to do things where the weaknesses do not hurt. So the solving it in a social context is a crucial thing. So I've covered the strengths, weaknesses, whatever initial comments I had, I wanted to put on the table, and then I'm going to do mostly through discussions. The last point I wanted to make is about tensions. The form in which I've always understood this is that your strengths and weaknesses are connected at the hip. Because you're strong at something, you're automatically weak at some other things. So for example, I'm very creative, so I'm relatively less organized because I think I can do something on the fly. I don't need that much organization. So I've had to learn a little bit. I'm a little bit better, but not very good. So there is a connection. So for example, that's why I put this diagram here. So in Jung's work, for example, let's take the easier part, which is the intuition and application. When you're intuiting something, you're trying to get a picture of the whole. You're trying to grasp the whole. You're trying to see, connections which are not clear to you, you're open to all of that. You're focused on openness. Whereas when you are applying things, you're focused like a laser beam on some things. So by focusing on it, when you're focused on that, you can't at the same time be aware of the whole. Similarly, when you're focused on the whole, at the same time, you cannot be focused on a narrow thing. So there is a natural tension between these two. Similarly, there is a natural tension. Here you're saying, what is it? What is it? What is it? And here you're fully expressing yourself. So while you're fully expressing yourself, you are not focused on the core. So you kind of have to use them in sequence in some way. There is a natural tension between these. And you have to understand that, you have to respect that, and you have to work with that. So that's what I wanted to put on the table. Now, deliberately, I've kept my presentation very short so that I want to now take any question that you have on these 4 slides. You can bring up any question, go ahead and type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom in order to ask questions. And I'll be happy to take as many questions on as many aspects as you want. Evanik, go ahead.
So in this diagram in the slide that you have up, what is the core? Like, what do you mean? Like, what is it?
You mean what is the white in the middle?
Yeah, you were talking about the core. Is that the core? Like what?
Oh no, what I was saying is that I was describing the blue, but
Okay.
if you want to ask the core is the fact that there is oneness to the path. All these 4 things. So another way of looking at it is that this diagram is actually a cross section. So if you cut this, cut the rope like this, you have these 4 strands going, and they have certain interaction between them. So this is like a cross section of this.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else? So if another way of doing this is to ask people about, now I want to see if you guys have gotten the concepts like 1, 2, 3, 4. If I were to ask you what you're strong, okay, I'll take questions first, and then I want to ask the question, and then I'm later on going to ask you to put things in chat. So the question I'm going to ask you, if you wanted to name 2 functions that you think you are strong at in order. So it's like, I'm strong at 3 and then 2, or 1 and then 4. What would you say? That's just something that I'm going to ask you, but I'm going to take questions first. So it's going to be John, followed by Ellen. John. John, you need to unmute.
Okay. Just so I understand trying to understand why all of this. We're taking a subject and we're applying the concept, the plan, the expression, how we express it to people, and the feedback from them. So we're taking a subject matter, just like Boyd is military, and the end act is dependent upon the observation, the orientation, and how he's going to apply. So they're all connected. So are we saying that we're taking a subject, whatever it be, and if we want to present it to an audience, we focus on these 4 different areas? That's what you're saying, right?
No, only that I'm saying only about this first row. What I'm saying, John, is that any field requires 4 different kinds of actions. So just like Boyd, in case of OODA loop, there are 4 different kinds of actions. You have to be observing, you have to be orienting, you have to be planning, and you have to be acting. And all four need to be going well for the whole operation to work.
Okay. That's
Okay.
the purpose of what we're doing.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
exactly.
All
Thank you. Next
right,
up,
thank you.
next up is Ellen, followed by Daljit. Ellen.
I'm observing an interesting pattern. If you take a look at the four quadrants,
Mhm.
if you just look at the top half, you have conceptual. If you look at the bottom, you have physical. If you-
What slide are you referring to?
Well, I'm probably thinking of philosophy. Well, any of them, but I'm wondering if this fits. We can start with philosophy.
No. So you're talking about, are you talking about these strands right now, or are you talking about the one that we are in part one?
I'm talking about the quadrant. So the definitions that were in the four quadrants.
Okay.
Basically what I'm seeing you're doing is you're challenging us to think about what the essence are. What is the essence? I have like 8 different words. Anyway, this is my interpretation.
Yes.
And in my previous studies, and I oriented them a little bit different. So I'm getting confused with my own orientation because they were different. But you have, in my view, a combination of conceptual, what is,
Mhm.
physical, what is, conceptual, what could be, and physical, what could be. And that in and of itself is a tension between what is and what could be.
So you're saying which of the two, so this, you're saying the one is conceptual, what is?
Sure. That's probably what I would do. Yeah, I think so. Let me see. Yes,
Okay.
yes. That
Okay.
is, yes. What is conceptual? That's number 1. And then number 2 is what could be conceptual. Number 3 is what is physical. And number 4 is what could be physical.
I mean, I don't see it that way. That's not the pattern that kind of goes for me across all the fields.
Or it's hard to describe it because
it is, yeah. So let me do one thing. Let me, because what you're saying is that you see different patterns than what I have put on the table, right?
Or I'm trying to answer your question before you've gotten to it, which is what is the essence? Have you distilled these 4 strands?
Yeah, that I'm not even trying to do that at this point. I will do that in a future one. I want you to see that this is an inductive process. It's a very slow inductive process because you're trying to process actually so much. And I think each of us will do it in their own way. And I want to do it step by step. So hold on, I'll hold on, but I'm going to get there a little bit later.
Can I ask one question then?
Sure, please.
I'm certified as a DISC trainer. Are you familiar with the DISC personality assessment or behavioral tendencies?
No.
Okay.
But
it's also, I think there's some really big overlap, or even Myers-Briggs.
Sure. Yeah, so. No, I mean, this is definitely, like Jung's functions are used are the basis of Myers-Briggs.
Yep.
So that goes definitely over here. Very good. So what I want to do is that I want to kind of look at the overall patterns. So, but I'll be happy to talk to you one-on-one on this. Okay. Next up is Daljit, followed by Laura. Daljit.
Yeah, I guess I have a similar question as Ellen, as I'm trying to map this into my own heuristic. And for me, it's the elements, the 4 elements, right? Fire, earth, air, and water. And I've always interpreted those mapping to the Jungian cognitive functions of intuition, sensation, thinking, feeling. You're using a slightly different variation of the Jungian functions, so that's maybe throwing me off. And then I have my own color coding too, which is fire is red, earth is green, air is yellow, blue is water. And then the other thing I guess I'm bumping on is the hierarchy, because I never can see those hierarchical. They are indeed cyclical. So I'm having a hard time stacking blue on top because there's, and to me also maybe the 5th element in the middle is prana, right? To bring your perspective. So that's just kind of, I'm struggling to map that into the elemental, which is really what hooked me when you said the Jungian thing. So
that's a good point. But the thing is that each of us has to do it in our own way as best as we can. And we have to, because this process is highly inductive. This is kind of bringing together everything that you know and coming up with a pattern that makes sense to you. So I invite, if any of you think that another pattern, another basic pattern captures everything that you know, you should definitely stick with it for sure. Next up is Laura, followed by Ambika. Laura. Laura, you need to.
Well, I have a question,
Yes.
just a simple thing. I'm good with all of this, and I find myself making other patterns in different ways, but another time. But I have trouble when I get to the yoga parts because I have no knowledge of this. Would it be very detrimental if I, at this point, remove that entire row so that?
No. It won't be detrimental at all. I mean, that's what I've been saying from the beginning. Just eliminate all the rows that you don't know anything about.
Okay.
That's the best way for everybody. Just remove the rows that you don't know. So that's, and just focus on rows that you really know to see if it makes sense. The overall patterns make sense. Okay, thank you. Ambika. And then I'm going to ask that question to everybody. Ambika, go ahead.
So firstly, thank you. This is quite fascinating, and thank you for your mastery, Shrikant. So I was also looking at it in terms of the elements, earth, water, fire, air, and I let go of the colors. It didn't bother me, but some of the characteristics take me, and this is from polarity therapy and healing principles and all of that. So Raja Yoga, because it's Raja Yoga and fullness and stability, became earth, and number 2 became air because of the intellect. We have knowledge and beauty and those concepts. 3 became fire because of action. Fire is typically taking action. And 4 became water because of intuition. I know they kind of go back and forth, but what this is having me do is reflect on certain things that I have done and how I did it and what happened and what didn't happen. And going forward, it's going to be interesting to see, right now I'm in many in-between places, shifts. And that's where this is happening for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Ambika. And, Ellen, Daljit, and Ambika, I mean, I really appreciate the thing is that this is exactly the level at which we have to be thinking of trying to take in everything and trying to make sense of everything. And I think it's great that each of you have your own kind of ways of taking it, and anything new that you see, like this presentation, you have to relate to that. And that's the only way of processing it. So next, what I want to do is I want to ask you a question. What is it? Which of these 4 things are you strongest at? And which is the second one? So you can put, like, suppose you're strongest at 3, you can say 3, 1, or 4, 2, or 1, 3. What's your strongest suit, you think?
What was coming up for me?
Yeah. No, go ahead and put it in the chat.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So we can have one and feedback. Okay. All right. Anybody else? So you can just put 1 and 2. Okay. We got 1 and 4. We got 2 and 4. Okay. So many have 1 as a starting point. Excellent. Okay, so I got 4 of them. So now I just want to open it up to people. Let's say, let's start with Joe. Joe, do you want to talk about do you see the difference between the strengths and the weaknesses? Like, for example, so the question would be, how do you approach your strengths and how do you approach your weakness?
How do I, like, with conceptually versus and feedback, like versus planning and expression?
So feedback, what would you say is your weakest?
Probably expressing.
Okay, how about that? Let's go ahead and folks, if you could put that in chat, what do you think is your weakest? So you can say W to start to distinguish it from the earlier answers. Okay, 2, 4. Okay, 3, 2. All right, so let's come back to Joe. So Joe, do you want to, how do you approach your strengths and weaknesses? What strategies do you use?
Well, I mean, with weaknesses, I try to surround myself with people that just are better than I am, whether it be planning or expressing. So that's pretty much the approach that I take when it comes to what my weaknesses. I also try. I used to maybe at one point was a little bit more trying to work on my weaknesses, but now I'm trying to build up, work on my strengths, to be quite honest, a little bit more. Conceptually, I can think about things. The way I work on concepts is primarily through 52 living ideas, to be quite honest. I mean, so I think that's, I guess they all involve other people. I must say that. So that's how I work on it. And then with feedback, I try to get as much feedback on a one-on-one basis. So I don't look for feedback necessarily in the group setting, but I do look for feedback on a one-on-one basis. So that's how I approach my strengths, because I look at that feedback and I try and incorporate that somehow into how I approach all these topics.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Becky, followed by Ellen. Becky.
I would say my weakest part would be expressing. And this one might sound a little bit ironic, but another thing that I see is that my strength is also sometimes my weakness because of the lack of control that I have. So I would say probably the concepts part, because I can tie everything together, and when I get that aha moment, I completely incorporate it into who I am. Like it resonates with me deeply, but I have so little control of it. It feels quite out of my power of when to induce that. So that's how I would describe my strength also being my weakness. But the way I approach developing my strength or developing my weakness is more on a I guess if you look at an axis with time, I would first work on, and in a new area or topic that I'm trying to master, I would first work on what I am good at in order to build up enough confidence or gain traction to sustain to a certain point where I've established like almost my little mini domain of being of making myself known for being good at something. And then that's when I'll start developing my weakness, because I know that's going to come and bite me later on. So I would say maybe like 3/4 of a way of developing my strength, I'll start to focus on developing my weakness.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. Anybody else who wants to talk about strengths and weaknesses, or you would like to raise any question, you're welcome to do that. Next up is Ellen.
I'm going to kind of go off topic for a minute. For about 10 years, I studied a system that was expanded upon kind of like chakras. and they were basically 11 approaching 12 different dimensions. And you could,
Ellen, let's do one thing. Let's not go off topic. This is a complex enough meetup.
well, I know, but I wanted to throw out if anyone had any interest in, like, I don't know if you're doing a 201 class, because this is fascinating. And I've always looking for group that wanted to get even more into this. You know, basically every one of these strands would get split into 3 substrands, you know,
Sure.
and I wanted to explain just enough about what I was trying to explain.
So the best thing is that you can send me an email and we can go, because I don't want the discussion to go be, you know, because it's complex enough discussion. So one of the things I try to do with my meetups is that I try to keep it on topic so that all these people can focus on just one thing and we can have a very deep, rich dialogue on it. So that's why I keep it on topic. But please write to me and we can definitely do a meetup. All right. Thank you.
Will you chat me your email? 'Cause I don't have-
Yeah, you can send it to 52livingideas@gmail.com. All right. Anybody else wants to talk about strengths, weaknesses, cooperation, and tensions? So the question is, how do you deal with your weaknesses? Do you see any tensions between your strengths and weaknesses? How do you use cooperation?
Daljit, as a
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm trying to map my heuristic onto yours, Srikant. Maybe
Please,
this will help.
go ahead.
So when I look at, you know, concept to me is intuition and fire, and express is verbal and so it's air. And I know those are my strengths. So I'm recognizing those, and I'm thinking, oh, planning takes practical earth-like capacity, and feedback is an emotional connection from others. So my heuristic is to say, oh, I know I'm fire, air strong, and I'm weak, water, earth. And I know those map to my astrology. So, you know, I'm always, again, looking to surround myself, as Joseph said, with people who have those good, solid, earthy or watery qualities, because they complement me. Cooperation. And I also think it's interesting that fire and air are both sort of yang, levitational type energies, whereas earth and water are yin and gravitational, and that's a tension of polarity. I think someone mentioned polarity. So it's interesting how all these words work out in this, you know, quadrant, you know, sort of paradigm. So that's how I would try to map it.
Daljit, let me understand. So let's spend a couple of minutes on this. So the fire and air, which two are fire and air?
For me, that top row is just concept. When I think of the concept is like the inspiration, the intuition is the fire to me, and expression is I think verbal. I think air. I think communication. And then planning feels very practical. It feels very grounded. It feels like an earth energy to me. And feedback is the other person. There's an emotional value to me, and that's like, oh, I'm getting that feedback from you. That feels emotional. It feels watery. I'm connecting. So I'm mapping my heuristic onto yours and trying, even though the colors don't match.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah, that's how I'm trying to make sense of this.
Yeah. By the way, the colors that I've used are Carl Jung's colors. For thinking, he uses blue. For sensing, he uses green. For emotion, he uses red, and for intuition, he uses yellow. So those are, that's how I've done it. But thank you. Anybody else? Let's see. John, did you have any comment about strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah. Planning. I put weakness. I put number 2 as my weakness, and only in relation that I have been very sheltered in my perception of things, and I want to get more perspective on how people think and why they think it. And so that was the reason that I put 2. I don't know if I put that. I don't know if putting that in 2 is planning is the right area, but that's what I feel I have a need of.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Jeff.
Hey, Shrikant.
Hi.
So thanks for doing this. It's wonderful to to do this. I really appreciate it. As I said to you, it's a tour de force of all of this. So the one thing that I want to mention here with regard to the whole subject of strengths is that this plays out both in leadership and in teams with the understanding that leadership is often situational rather than only positional, and that many different situations call for folks who have a different blend of skills or experience or access to networks or expertise, and one of the secrets of a really good leader in these times, and it's only going to increase as things change, continue to change quickly, and as the nature of some challenges and opportunities get more complex, that relying on what everyone brings and allowing ourselves to be situational in who we ask for their perspectives, or making sure that we gain everybody's perspectives, is really essential. And so it's not an either or about creativity or strength or rationality or relatability or whatever it is. We need everybody in the game. And so that's what I'll offer with regard to the leadership and team perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I fully agree. I mean, that is the core idea of this, the rope, where you need all these four things to be going for it to work. Next up is Ellen. Ellen, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up. That was a really cool, interesting comment. One of the things that I've found in my life, and I do disc training, and my style is only 3% of the population. And so, and we're kind of a small group here, so maybe I found my people here. But if you don't have the same tacit knowledge, and if you don't have the same frame of reference, it's very difficult for someone to really understand your perspective. And even when I look at these different strands, what I think of as concept might be different than what Shrikant's thinking or what Joseph's thinking. And so, I mean, we're processing this information in the only manner we can, which is through our experiences and our frame of reference. And so that to me is going to be the most challenging thing for, I mean, we all want to understand each other's perspectives, but I think maybe the first thing we have to realize is it's difficult, because if I bring up an idea and then someone doesn't know what I'm talking about because they don't have the same frame of reference, or they don't have the same even understanding of the terms that I'm using.
Thank you, Ellen. I mean, the way in which what we have tried to do in 52 Living Ideas is that we have these full form discussions where people get a chance to put things down. So the great example would be the meetups that we are doing on Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, or Gospel of John, where we are fully expressing, each person is fully expressing themselves on each of the ideas. We're going back and forth. And it is through that process. Here, what I have tried to do is to give you many different fields. So instead of just concept, plan, express, feedback, I've tried to give you multiple fields from which, and I know that some of you are going to be familiar with some of the fields, some of you are not going to be familiar with some of the fields. And I'm hoping that each person kind of induces from the things that they know to see what a concept is. Now, it is I realize that this is very much kind of inductive heavy, intuition heavy kind of an approach. And maybe there is a better way of presenting it. And I'm always working on better ways of presenting things. So thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Next up is Evanik, followed by Ambika. Evanik.
Yeah, I was noticing this list, and as people are picking out where they're strong and where they're weak at. I noticed like it isn't the typical job interview, like what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses type thing. And I like that because it is, in a sense, it is your weaknesses, but it's also things that you can grow in. So the way I look at it is areas I can grow in. So I really like the way you did this overall. I'm still thinking of it in that manner, especially with how do I look, how do I operate out of this model? And I think what I do is I focus on my strengths and I just go ahead with that. And then where I'm not strong, either I try to build that up or I rely on other people that have those strengths to help me out. And I do that in a combination, but I love the way that you did this. I think it's just a totally new way to look at strengths and weaknesses.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And I like Becky's comment about doing like 3/4 on your strengths and then working, I look at it like 80-20, like 80% strengths and 20% weaknesses. And again, what both Joe and Daljit talked about, always work with people who are strong on where you're weak, because that itself actually takes care, because you want the ultimate throughput and you can get it through cooperation. Part of it, you can get it through cooperation, and you can learn a lot through inspiration, through like other people, watching other people and interacting with other people. Next up is Ambika, followed by Joe and Becky. Ambika.
So I think people have said some really great things, and I'm just going to add a little bit of my experience. The whole idea of what's, with me looking back over different things and now, and looking at what did I do that was a weakness, that showed up as a weakness, and how can I change that? And it's really a great time to reflect because of the transitions. And I discovered I'm not just in the in-between places, I'm in many in-between places at the same time. So this is fascinating to me. And I feel one can actually adapt it to what one needs to do, or how to play with it. And it's amazing playtime. I'm going to see it as playtime, because that's when I can happily say I'm full of weaknesses and there's a few strengths here. It's really lovely. Therefore, it is time for the chai.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ambika. Next up is Joe, followed by Becky. Joe.
Yeah, one thing, and just coming back to how to approach the concept plan and express feedback, is that I always kind of seek out people that are better than I am in all four.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I also do is seek, I get really used to failure. And that can be a double-edged sword, right? Because it can impact your confidence, it can do certain things, you start to hold yourself to standards sometimes. But I think that the most important thing is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so even if you look at something as your strength, I still look at it as just get around people that are better than you are, and period. And don't look at yourself as superior in one and they're complimenting another. Just constantly try and incorporate as much as the best you can from them. And that's how I find myself to approach these, all four of these areas. Because I was just thinking about this specifically within the Boyd model, and like who I would approach, and then how would I approach it. And there are certain individuals that with helping me orient. There are certain, there are individuals that are better at deciding, action, and observing. But again, it's just the process of being around people better than yourself.
No, I think that's a fantastic point. I fully, wholeheartedly agree with that. I try to do that all the time, because, and that's partly, you have to keep in mind the spiral part. Like, you are strong at something, but you can be 10 times that strong. And you don't, so even if on your strongest suit, you can be 10 times stronger. And how are you going to get there? And crucial part of it is learning from others. So being around people who are strong. So I think kind of jealousy and those kind of things are just completely self-defeating. What you're really looking for is admiration, looking for people whom you can admire on everything as much as you can. And that is the way forward personally for you. And it is just too. Joe, you had something.
No, I think that you've hit on the major point, is like, where does it break down? Like when you're trying to get better in these areas. And if you look at something in a envy, and you kind of start to look at and start to view people, and actually not necessarily, one of the things that I remember, there's a lot of people who write about this, and Thomas Aquinas is one of them, is the idea of a friend is to really will the other person better than yourself. Part of it. And that's the other part of it, is that you're willing the other person better, but you're appreciating what they're bringing to the table so that you can incorporate it into actually what you do. So there's an ethics component to this. Yes. That's really, really very much, in fact, the virtuous components kind of.
Excellent point. Another angle on this is you're always thinking win-win. You're not, like, moment you start thinking win-lose, you're trying to protect what you have, and then you're going down. Actually, you're reducing your capacity. When you're thinking win-win, you're saying, how can I combine my strengths with other people's strengths in order to grow faster? And that is the way up. So I think the win-win versus win-lose, or abundance mentality of saying, together we can do more than what we have, instead of saying, okay, there is a scarcity and how do we divide it? Because if I get less than, if I get more, then other people get less, and vice versa. So that's not how the world is. So I think that's, it's very much, it's not just it's at the ethical level, it is at the emotional level, it is at the economic level, just across the same. Next up, thanks, Joe. Great comments. Next up is Becky, Ambika, and Laura. Becky.
As a comment to what Jeff was saying earlier with teams, and as well as what you were saying, Shrikant, about working with others, what I've noticed is that when I am on a team with people who are highly compatible with me, we can be bouncing ideas off each other like rapid speed, and we can hit those highs in like thoughts. But then at the same time, we fall victim to our blind spots, and so those lows are very low. Whereas when I'm working with others who have my who are strong in my weaknesses in terms of perspective and how we operate, perhaps in methods or there's that friction. The communication is harder, but it's more comprehensive. And so we might not get those highs, but we also avoid those lows. So going back to what Jeff said, having a good mix of both on the team is really useful.
Fantastic point, Becky. You use the word friction. I think that's the right word. What happens is that when you're trying to deal with somebody whose mode of operation is very different from yours, most people don't handle that well. And this is the primary benefit I got from studying Carl Jung's cognitive functions, and then doing all the meetups on Myers-Briggs that Becky, you were part of. The great thing you realize is that the other person is operating differently, because before that, what happens is that you just assume that the other person is operating exactly the same way as you do. So you're interpreting everything that they're doing from that perspective. Just simply saying that the other person is operating differently, this is how they are operating, and respecting that. That's why I think respect is critical of saying that all of these things are needed and all of these things are valuable. And how do you do that? And what happens is that in order to deal with people from different backgrounds, and again, 52 Living Ideas is a very good example of that. We welcome people with all kinds of points of view, all kinds of backgrounds. People, speak their mind about everything. And it makes possible things that were not possible, because it's you see new intersections, you see new unions which are there. Like if you combine this with that, what happens? And none of that is possible unless you're willing to accept the friction of dealing with people who are different than you.
I agree. So what you had started off with respect was so important, because as you said, when we're interacting with people, our default is to assume and project everyone thinks like us. Why can't people understand? And then having to learn like the cognitive functions, it allows us to respect how others are and to see from their point of view, because everything does make sense if we transition away from ourselves. And most of the times people don't think like us. So it is exactly how you said it. It's the respect comes from understanding from the other person's point of view.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. Next up is Ambika, followed by Laura. Ambika.
So I just wanted to add that, this whole dynamic about going from strength to weakness or negation to positive, it's such a dance. A weakness one day may not be a weakness the next day. It's just that in a specific situation, something may have shown up as a weakness, but it really could also be a strength. So it's a dance we are playing. And what I just want to share with everybody is this beautiful idea that you are always whole no matter what. And, that statement, Shrikant, well, Purnamidam Purnamada Purnat Purnacha Mudachyase. So please say the second part, Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. You are whole no matter what. And that's the beauty of you. So
Wonderful. Thank you. Again, it's a core part of Indian thinking. I think yesterday during Bhagavad Gita, somebody asked a question, was asking, how do we make sure that we are okay? And how is it, are we okay? And how do we know that we are okay? So the core Indian answer to that is that you just have to go back to your core. I have always been okay. You just get distracted by something. So the kind of the wholeness is always there. It's because we get focused on parts and put all our attention over there that we lose the concept. The whole doesn't go away. It's always there. Laura.
Okay, I want to do two things. And the first one is I want to say you've gotten really good at your diagrams. You're amazing how you get everything into 4 quadrants like this. Over time, it's become very sophisticated and much more intense. So I think you should.
Thank you, Laura.
I think you should be proud of yourself from the first time you started doing these little graphs way back when,
Still, I'm no good, Laura. I'm still trying. I'm still.
I know. You want to put the whole world, you want us to be in 4 quadrants and everything to fit perfectly. And you're getting good, you're getting better.
Well, appreciate that. Thank you. No, really appreciate that. Thank you.
Maybe some of us have strengths that, you could, talk to somebody who might have more strength in this area that could help you out, you should look over here and see. The other thing is I sort of been doing a boogie woogie here to all of this, and I've been creating, and I don't know if it's okay, but I put my finger on, like, I want to decide to enhance a concept, and I've been sort of playing around, like reordering all these things and, like I said, doing a boogie woogie on them, and I don't know if that's okay, but we're having a lot of fun, and thinking about how many ways I could, you know.
Yeah,
do-
no, I absolutely. I think it's everybody needs to do boogie woogie with all the stuff that they get. That's how it works. The way it works is that you have to like take the diagram. So just like even if when I'm reading, like even if I'm reading, I think reading is wrong. You have to write. You read only in order to write. So you have to let whatever you're taking in express through your hands. And that's the only way to actually commune with what you're getting, because otherwise it's passive. It's not TV. This is not TV. So absolutely, I think everything, I like that active format. All right, folks. So this has been a great honor. I am so delighted that you guys came. Fantastic feedback, fantastic questions. Really appreciate that. And I will keep working on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Bye, everybody.
Shrikant, for having us. Thank you.
Bye.
Wonderful.
Bye.